So when you have a few people that are in your corner that push you and say you can do better, the butterfly effect can happen really, really quickly. So for me, Gordon at the first time sat me down and said, mate, what are you doing? And I said, I'm having fun. He said, yeah, I know that, mate, but I want you to do more because I know you can. Best thing I could have heard. I looked around at a lot of the guys who were ahead of me and realised that they weren't training as hard as me. They didn't want it as much as me. So as soon as that switch went on, everything just fell into place. And within 18 months from then, I ended up getting picked to play for Australia on that tour. It happened that quickly.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava and you are listening to episode 219 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors and operators to unpack their journey, lessons and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. My guest for this episode is Stirling Mortlock. If you're not already familiar with Stirling, he is one of Australia's greatest ever rugby players. He's a former Wallabies captain, played at 2 World Cups and is one of only 9 players in the history of Super Rugby to score over 1,000 points. But his story goes well beyond just the sporting field, and since retiring, he's gone on to build a career as a founder and investor. He is a co-founder at XV Capital, where he invests into the next generation of sports tech startups. In this episode, we dive into his journey from professional sports into business, the parallels between elite sporting teams and high-growth startups, and his lessons on leadership, resilience, and risk-taking. I'm also excited to announce that Stirling is one of our speakers for Cohort 2 of the Komo Club, the world's first human accelerator, where we help founders and executives implement the systems to help them win in business and in life. You can find out more details and apply for Cohort 2 at thekomoclub.com. That's thekomoclub.com. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Stirling Mortlock. Hi, Stirling. Welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Pleasure to be here.
Stirling, I remember watching you. So I grew up in Canberra, moved around a lot, but Canberra's the closest thing I have to a hometown. So I remember watching you on the rugby field way back in the day when I was in high school. But for maybe those of our listeners that aren't as familiar with you and your background and your story, do you want to share a little bit about your background and what got you here today?
Yeah, sure. So very lucky to have played professionally rugby union for 15 seasons. And 13 of those seasons was down in Canberra playing for the Brumbies, which is still to this day Australia's most successful Super Rugby team, and also managed to play for Australia for a fair bit of that time as well. I actually got picked in 97, so before I was contracted to play for the Brumbies, I got picked out of club rugby to go on the 97 end of season tour for Australia whilst I was still at university. And yeah, that fast-tracked a professional career in rugby, and that was 97 was when I was 20 years of age. So I was in second year university, and then all the way through to when I retired. I played for 15 seasons. I retired down here in Melbourne, played 2 seasons with the Melbourne Rebels, and unfortunately the Rebels are no longer around. But that was a great experience, and went from being a 20-year-old all the way through to a 35-year-old, had 3 kids, and had gone from being a very young pup, as we used to call it, or a young buck, to being a leader in the team and captaining the Brumbies, captaining Australia, the Wallabies, and captaining the Rebels at the end of my career as well. So it was a huge journey, and then probably post-career transition away from sport. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I actually had a couple of years being connected to the Rebels, being involved with the commercial side of the business as well as the coaching team, so high performance and commercial, which was great. But I had 15 seasons and then a few more been actively 24/7 thinking about rugby and felt like I needed a break. And so I went into the banking and finance sector. And then probably about 2019, the Rugby World Cup in Japan, went over there. One thing that's great about our sport is you're always a Wallaby, and going to see the matches, and as a former captain, going to World Cups is a unique honour and a privilege. And I went over there and got the bug to get back into sport. Didn't know what capacity, and ended up, that was the genesis to then teaming up with my now co-founding partner, James Godfrey. He was involved with an initiative with rugby over in North America at the time, and that was the genesis of XV Capital. And so we're a sports investment and advisory business, really backing, I guess, a digital transformation space in sport, and ideally finding transformative technologies that we love and investing in those and being really active and helping them grow throughout the globe. So that's a long-winded answer as to how I've got to here today to be in front of you.
Yeah, an incredible journey. Obviously, so many different parts of that story that I want to dig into, but you touched on the fast track that you had with your rugby career. But if I have my research correct, you actually started playing rugby when you were 4?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's a nice little story just in itself. So Phil Waugh, who's the current CEO, Phil Waugh started when he was very young. I think I may have just pipped him, but very close to the similar age. And Waugh is only a year or two younger than me. A year, I should say. But the only reason I started when I was that age was because my older brother Jeremy was 3 years older than me. And at that point in time, under sevens was the first year that you played rugby. And so that Dad took Jeremy to get registered, and I happened to be in the car. And I'm one of 5 kids, so 4 boys, and then my sister, who's the youngest. It was a pretty amazing childhood growing up, but I'd imagine any time to get me out of the house would have been well received from Mum. And so, yeah, I just happened to be in the car with Dad, and the person at the registration table looked at me and said, "Is he playing as well?" When Jeremy registered, and Dad just said, "Oh, do you want to play?" And I just said yes. Didn't know what I was doing, and literally, my parents used to joke that I did more making mud pies and things on the sideline than I did actually playing rugby in that first year. But by the second year, I started to enjoy it. And the third year, I was playing against people my own age, which was a lot more fun. And so from then on, I always play rugby. But having said that, I loved all sports. I still do now. I love watching all sports now. But I any sport you put in front of me, I used to enjoy playing. Really active kid, full stop. And I guess one thing, having played rugby from such a young age, I even played football, soccer for a year or two at school, at primary school as well, because we had rugby, but then it stopped. So I wanted to play something, so I played soccer as well. So only thing I didn't play was probably AFL, because up in Sydney, growing up in those days, it wasn't as prevalent as it is now.
Yeah. What did that look like in terms of that journey from a 4-year-old accidentally signing up to your brother's rugby team to realizing that you could do this for a living and for a career? Was there a particular point where I guess you became obsessed with the sport and saw that pathway, or was that more accidental?
Yeah, I'd say I was obsessed with sport. So I remember hounding my parents. So I played cricket up until when I was about 14 or 15. And then I jumped across to basketball. I've got a number of MJ1s. I'm wearing a pair of MJ1s today because Michael Jordan was the original, and my idol growing up as a pretty keen athlete in all sports. But I tend to think if it wasn't rugby, it would have been something else, another sport as well, maybe basketball, maybe. I always joke that I had 2 seasons in the first 5 at school and only 1 season in the first 15, the first rugby. So I always joked that I was legitimately a better basketball player than rugby player, which is far from the truth. But I do recall when I was in year 11 having a good chat to one of my best mates at school and talking about goals and things that we wanted to achieve. And I actually remember, it was really amazing. He was living over in South Africa for a period of time and happened to be at Durban in 2000 when the Wallabies, we played the Springboks in South Africa. We needed to win the Tri Nations. And I also kicked the goal that won the match at the end of the game. And he actually fought his way into the change rooms. He could talk underwater. So he literally found his way and told everyone he was my brother.
Yeah.
I'm 6'3", he's 5'4" or whatever. And he's blonde.
Yeah.
But he came into the change room and we had that moment where, mate, back in year 11, where we spoke about what we wanted to do. And I actually did say I would love to play rugby for Australia. But at that time, as I said, I only played 1 year in the first 15. Yeah. I was in the 16As, I think, at the time. But if you'd asked anyone of my teammates or anyone who played in and around rugby with me, they would not have picked that I was going to play for Australia.
Yeah. I was about to say, obviously you've had this illustrious rugby career, the fastest to 50 and 100 points, I believe. Again, if my research is correct.
That's correct.
I guess for someone looking at what happened in your career, it can seem that was extremely obvious even at 11 years of age. But again, from what I understand, you were overlooked for rep teams as well growing up. So what was that like?
I guess I had an interesting development. So when I was very young, around about 10, 11, 12, at primary school, so before secondary school, I did a lot of sports and ended up being a national level 800 metre runner. And I did everything I did okay. Whether it was cross country, athletics, tennis, cricket, rugby, the whole thing. But at that level, at that age group in rugby, I was playing for Gordon. Gordon's a rep team in junior rugby. So my club was Linfield Juniors. And if you're good enough, you get picked to play for Gordon, and you play in the state championships, which still happens to this day up in Sydney. And one of those years, I don't remember which one it was, I did get the best back in the state championships. So I was actually very good at that age. But I think one thing that I always joke about, for me, I grew really, really, really late. Very late to go through puberty. My younger brother went through puberty before me at boarding school. That was a bit of a challenge. It was quite an interesting paradigm. But as an extension of that, I didn't stand out at all when I was young. When I was playing at school, I literally grew probably at least 10 centimetres after school, and I put on at least 10 to 15 kilos within the first 2 years leaving school. So, and ingrained within me, I love sport. I loved playing touch footy. Like every day I would make sure I did my homework before I got home from the school bus so I could go up to the park and play with my mates. And typically it was touch footy and or anything that was going, right? So I just love sport. And then I didn't really realise it, but what really fast-tracked my development post-school was growing bigger and stronger. But I was happy doing sprint training. I did 2 or 3 sprint training sessions a week. I'd do extra kicking sessions a week. I'd do everything I could to get better. I'd be going to the gym. All these things I was doing, but effectively I was almost training like a professional athlete without even thinking about it when I was at university, just because I loved it. And that was actually a huge factor in what fast-tracked my professional career. Yeah. Training for me, training hard, working when you don't want to. I didn't mind it. I enjoyed it. So that, to me, was a big determining factor, even before I end up playing it at a late level.
Have you read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell?
I have.
You have?
Yeah, I hated it.
You hated it?
No, all of his books are outstanding. A lot of these books around different things that happens and patterns and or leadership and learning from great leaders. Definitely, when I was on my journey as an athlete, but then certainly a leader, you really try to take ammunition or lessons from other places. And when I read that, in particular, the correlation between age relative to the cutoff of your age group, I did not like that. In particular, I didn't like it because I was young for my age in my year group. So when I was in year 7 at secondary school, I was still 12. So I was actually the same age group as a lot of guys in prep. Yeah. And actually in sport, especially rugby, I played in the under 12s. So that first year, normally in year 7, everyone plays in under 13s. I played in under 12s. There was a lot of my mates who were like that, but it ended up being great for me because I was mates with a lot of guys in the year below me, and also had all the guys who were in my year who I was really good mates with. But from the Malcolm Gladwell methodology, that should have been a big challenge for me to do well. I actually spin that on its head. I felt like that was outstanding for me because I was technically going up with guys who were a year older than me, a year more physically developed than me. In particular, I said before, I grew late as well. So when I grew and when I got physically, I'd say mentally as well, but physically caught up, it was like a slingshot. Yeah. It was really, really good for me. And the whole way through, I was just doing my Sunday's best to compete with these guys who are bigger, stronger, faster. And my competitive desire and competitive will to keep on staying in the fight was born through that paradigm. Yeah. As I say, I think it's from my personal perspective, almost the opposite of that, what he described.
I was about to say, I actually think there are studies. So there was a guy who was a PhD who was part of my last startup that I was involved with, who looked at AFL player development. And I'm going to butcher his actual research, but the crux of it was that naturally kids that get picked for rep are usually ones that have physically developed more and tend to dominate sport at that earlier age. Yeah. But you have a bunch of kids like yourself who develop late or don't have that actually end up being more successful over the career because they've had to develop their technique against, as you said, bigger, stronger, faster players. And so they've got they almost have to work harder to kind of compete at that level. But then if they are able to catch up physically, they've got all those advantages of not having to rely on some of those physical advantages that's come from developing a bit faster.
Yeah, and that was certainly my experience. So going back to post-school and when I first got into sort of semi-rep, I think it was my second year at... Yes, it was. It was my second year at Colts. I was still eligible for the under-19s. And so effectively I was competing with guys who'd just come out of school. I'd had a whole year of playing Colts. So I felt like I had an advantage. However, I got picked... Back in those days, there was New South Wales Country played against New South Wales City or a possibles and a probables. And I was on the bench of whichever one was the lesser of two of those possible probables team. And I was an outside back, but I felt, again, I'd had that year of Colts and a bit more hard edge I'd been through scenarios historically where, especially actually in basketball, where I was in a trial match to make the GPS team and I didn't. And I'd learnt the hard way that whenever you're in a situation to play for a potential jersey or a representative team, there's no point in worrying about the outcome. There's no point in not putting your best foot forward. So I made sure that when I got a chance, I only got off the bench, I took advantage of that opportunity. So then I got from that on the bench of the New South Wales under-19s team. And again, same thing. So I got an opportunity and didn't get picked in the Australian team. I got picked I was a shadow member of the Australian team. So if someone was to get injured, I was in the next one to get called up. Someone did get injured. He was actually a mate of mine from the Kings, Chuck Carter. So thank you to Chuck. He got injured. I got called up. So I got called up. So pretty much reserve, shadow member, called up late to go over to New Zealand. Chris Malone and myself were two guys who got called up late, two backs, and ended up playing in a provincial match, a trial match of the tour, and ended up making the test team. And once I did that, then I was on the map as far as from a youth development and whatnot. But until then, it was far from in the system, if that makes sense.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about one of our partners, Vanta. So if you're building a SaaS business and want to quickly unlock growth and build customer trust, one way to do this is by achieving compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, CPS 234, Essential 8, or other in-demand compliance frameworks. However, this process is often time-intensive and very costly. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, making you audit-ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And not only that, Vanta scales with your business. With a market-leading trust management platform to help you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. You can join over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, and Indebted that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. As a listener of the show, you can get up to $1,000 US off Vanta when you head over to vanta.com/demo. All right, let's get back to the episode. How do you, keep that belief in yourself through that period? So as you said, you're going from reserves to reserves, and you had that experience a little bit with basketball, but I think with sport in particular, where a lot of it is based on someone selecting you for particular things or opportunities coming through, how do you, as a young adult still trying to figure things out, how do you maintain that faith through those periods where you're still in reserves, you're progressing, but I guess there's no kind of guarantee of an outcome?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think firstly, there's a bit of luck involved. I was really, really lucky to have some amazing rugby mentors that happened to be at my club, Gordon, when I first came in my first season. And that season I was actually technically it was fourth grade Colts. So it was way from playing for Australia or first grade or even first grade Colts. But I was lucky that the head coach of fourth grade was an amazing man by the name of Gordon Ogilvie. He was ex-Zimbabwean. Rugby was a religion to him, and he was all about goal setting. And unfortunately, he's not with us, but at his funeral, there was probably about, maybe 200 to 300 former players that he had impacted, and there would have been a lot more who were all there because Big G sat them down at one stage and said, "What are you doing about setting goals for your rugby? What are you doing about setting goals for your life?" He was that inspirational figure, and I was just lucky that he was one of them. And then Mark Davis was another one, who was the first grade Colts coach at the time. Davo was on his way to representing Australia. He played sevens and whatnot, and he had a career-ending injury. But his drive and desire and his high performance mentality and methodology was outstanding. So I was just really lucky to come into an environment where some amazing people like that were having oversight and believed. Probably belief is probably the number one thing. I remember Davo actually wrote a letter to me, a handwritten letter to me about having a goal of playing for Australia. So when you have a few people that are in your corner that push you and say you can do better, the butterfly effect can happen really, really quickly. So for me, it was a little bit of that. It was more Gordon. Gordon at the first time sat me down and said, "Mate, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm having fun." He said, "Yeah, I know that, mate. But I want you to do more because I know you can." So his carrot and stick, he got the stick out and put it on me. Best thing I could have heard. And then fast forward to a year later, I was playing rep footy. I'd already captained that side. We won the premiership that year when in the force. And it was more around those guys backing me and, as I said, giving me what I needed at the time, which at the time was probably a cattle prod, not a carrot. And then being in my corner. As soon as that happened, the switch went on for me personally. I looked around at a lot of the guys who were ahead of me and realised that they weren't training as hard as me. They didn't want it as much as me. And I'd argued that potentially I was better than them. So as soon as that switch went on, everything just fell into place. And within 18 months from then, I ended up getting picked to play for Australia on that tour. It happened that quickly.
Incredible. I mean, so I think you referenced this a little bit earlier, but when you were 20, so I believe 97, you got picked to go on tour with the Australian team. Was there anything that you took away from being around the team and around that particular environment that shifted anything for you at that age?
I joked before we started this at borderline ADHD and everything else. I mean, I was just an Energizer bunny on that tour. I think most of the guys just thought I was a lunatic. But what I did take away was that if I was diligent and kept working hard, like a lot of these guys, your Timmy Horans, Jason Littles, George Gregan, Steve Larkham, Joe Roth. I've named only backs. I should name some more forwards, but all these guys and whatnot, they were world class, if not already world champions, but on the way to being world champions. He was lucky to won 2 World Cups, but I felt that if I worked hard and applied myself, I could potentially be along beside them. I felt like I'd already been picked, but probably I needed to do a lot more to get that, to earn that respect, or to earn that, I wouldn't say status, but to feel comfortable in being in their team.
And you touched on the importance of goal setting and what one of your mentors really helped highlight for you. I think it's something that really stood out to me from Cohort 1 of the Komo Club as well, where we're talking to a lot of our members about what they want to achieve. And I think a lot of us just get on this treadmill of opportunity or just focus on the immediate thing versus really being intentional about the goals and outcomes that we really want and taking time to really map out what that looks like and working backwards from that.
Yeah.
Any advice, I guess, having had that experience both in sport and I guess a lot of what you're doing now for both yourself and as well as the founders that you work with as well, in terms of the right approach to setting goals and what that should look like for people?
I don't think there's a right approach. You can talk about SMART goals and different things like that, and they definitely help, no doubt. But I think more what is powerful is the process of going through writing down your goals and ideally sharing them with someone. You don't have to, because as soon as that whole process, as soon as you go from the theoretical world to the physical world, which is writing them down, is extremely powerful. And that powerful I often say the antenna's up, but really the manifestation cycle that can go in with that process is incredibly powerful. I will say this, that when I wrote my goals down that first time with Gordon, and as I said, I just finished that season of playing 4th grade Colts, and I wrote down at the top of my list I wanted to play for Australia, and in less than 2 years' time I'd achieved it. Gordo rang me up and said, "You've achieved all your goals." It's the only time in my whole goal setting journey that I achieved everything. You don't normally achieve everything, but it's that saying, you shoot for the stars, you might reach the moon thing. As soon as you put them down, written paper, you're actually accountable to those because they are in the physical world. They've gone from the theoretical world into the physical world. And then even more powerful if you share them with someone that you care about, share them with someone that potentially can keep you accountable to that, even more powerful as well. So I think that process is probably more important than what you do and how you do it. I like the Melways concept or whatever. You look where you want to go and then you reverse engineer it. All those things are really powerful as well. SMART goals are really powerful. All these things are really powerful, but the start and doing it is probably more important.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. There's no one right approach. It's, like you said, more about the process of doing that. That being said, like you said, you wrote down your goal was to play for Australia, which you then achieved, I imagine, when you were 23 at the time? 23, 24?
Yeah. So I guess the great thing about goals is once you've achieved them or gone close or had a crack, you set new ones. That's the journey. And then you might add some complexity to them or SMART goals, or you might, as you go on the journey, really refine that and be really specific on what that looks like. There was a period of time actually in my career where I played for Australia. I hadn't captained Australia, but I played for Australia. And a couple of my goals, one was actually to captain Wallabies. Gordon pushed me on that one. I was umming and ahhing about that one, to be honest. And then a part of it was actually a feeling. I actually wrote down that when I take the field, I want to embody someone that's 120 kilos, 115 kilos, way above my size. And the physicality, the spirituality that embodies is how I want to be. So it was very, 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 very different. But it worked massively for me. That was between 05, 06. I ended up putting on a lot of weight in the off-season and going from an athlete who was all about gain line and everything else to feeling like I had enough physical dominance that I could actually start really imparting that on people, which was good fun.
You mentioned that your period with the Brumbies was one of the Brumbies are the most successful Australian rugby union team. What does high performance look like for a sports team, and how does that translate into how you see that in business? So I guess what are some of the habits, mindset, approaches that you've seen work in your time in the Brumbies, with the Wallabies, with the Rebels, that you look for now in companies?
I think there's a lot of things that are transferable, in particular habit or routines. Really high performing organisations, the team has a rhythm every week or whatever it is. And individuals will have a rhythm as well, a routine, right? That keeps them in check to know that that's going to get them to being at their optimal for that 80 minutes at 7:45 p.m. on Friday night or Saturday night or Sunday or whatever it is, right? And when you're in an environment whereby every single person is doing that and every single group collectively, we are all dialed into doing that, it's really, really powerful. And then also linked to that, utmost clarity in what our jobs are. So what's the focus for the season? What's the vision for the season? What are our values? What are we going to conduct? How do we conduct ourselves each day in, day out? What are those values? And what is my job in achieving that outcome or that goal or whatever we set down? So having clarity of that is categorically critical in a high-performing club or team, but certainly in a high-performing corporate as well. And probably if you go one layer below that, the best teams I was ever in, it wasn't just about knowing your job. It was about knowing how my job impacts my guys inside me, outside me, and knowing then when done well, that impacts positive on the forwards or whatever, and vice versa. When I don't do my job, that impacts detrimentally here and there and everywhere. And knowing how everything fits together, and in the heat of battle, knowing that's really important because you can make quick decisions to be quite agile when you need to be. Yeah. If you don't know that and you just go at a whim, it can be quite damaging. So yeah, I guess the crux of that is, there was a period of time where we absolutely knew everyone's strengths, right? Weaknesses. But our ability to leverage our strengths, both from a tactical point of view leading into a performance or actually out in battle mode under pressure, we could do it. And when you're in an environment that's doing that, it's unbelievably amazing. Yeah. it's really self-fulfilling, where you're playing against opposition and you know that Andrew Walker, for instance, is one of the best second wave attackers ever, and let's just make sure we do our job and give the ball to him with lots of space in the second wave, and you watch him go untouched, score tries and whatnot. It's really cool.
How did your approach to the game change, if at all, between when you were a player versus when you were in leadership roles as a captain of the Brumbies or the Wallabies?
Yeah, I think every captain will go through this, or every leader will go through this, that often you focus on the whole collective, you focus on the whole group, you focus on everything, and inevitably you can't do that. And something gives, and often it might be your personal performance that gives initially. And so there was probably two learns straight away for me. Again, going back to knowing your strengths, knowing the strengths of your team, and delegating to your teammates for their strengths is really, really important. So delegation. And then secondly, doing your job. Going back to rule number one, knowing your job, do your job is really, really, really important and really simple. So as a leader, if you delegate really efficiently and effectively, you know your job and you do your job really well, because you are a captain for a reason, that's a great start. The flip side is if ever you're in a sporting team or organisation where the leader is not leading by example or doing their job, it's pretty infuriating, right? So, but it's an easy trap that you can start thinking about everything, over analysing everything and worrying about everyone's job and everyone's doing every different. I mean, you just can't do that. There's just not enough time in the day. So you got to have faith in the process and the system and the people around you and your leaders around you. And as soon as you do that, it actually can be a lot significantly easier to lead when you rely or leverage everyone around you.
Yeah. And you mentioned this in a couple of different ways, even as you touched on before we turned on the mics, when you were talking about, I guess, your own growth and your experience with ADHD. And I guess some people can look at that as something detrimental, but you can almost use some of those things as strengths, as superpowers. Again, is that trying to translate that across to business? Is that something that you look for as well in terms of what are the superpowers of founders or particular companies in terms of doing things, in terms of like really honing in on what makes it special versus trying to find things that are more well-rounded in that perspective?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I think that having that gets you to really understand how you work, firstly, and how to get the best out of yourself and try not to derail or put yourself into positions where you might derail yourself. And then secondly, I think it gave me a decent empathy to understand how people tick, what makes them tick, and probably more importantly, what I tried to do as a leader to make everyone really comfortable in their own skin. When they're comfortable in their own skin, they can actually resonate at their optimal frequency and all those things that are really cool. Be themselves and be their best self without worrying about any judgment or anything like that. That's when you're in an environment like that, that's really awesome. So I tried to do that. And the best way, again, was to live by example, to be myself. The challenge was if I got too energetic and I got too crazy, I'd have to dial myself back down a bit and whatever. So I felt, to me, that wasn't a bad thing at all. It was an excellent thing. I just needed to make sure that gave me what I felt was better empathy and better understanding to how to short circuit things. And in particular, if I was losing concentration and wasn't focusing, I guarantee you that a lot of other people were as well, right? So I felt like that kept me more focused on what I think the collective group needed, which is often less is more. Clarity of message as opposed to saying 10 things at once. All those things were really important to me because that's what I was. So, and then when I look at it now, as far as superpower, yeah, I do feel like I look at things a little bit differently, because I do look at it from a lens of what is their superpower. Is this something that we really can get behind, and are they doing something different? Just because I feel like the way that I looked at things is slightly different. So yeah, definitely. And in particular, when you're talking about backing people, getting to know them and getting to know their superpower is really, really important. And I feel like that's something that I do have a decent affinity to sit down and talk to someone and go, okay, I think this is where they're really, really good, and this is where this is where their hitting zone is. Not saying that's a strength, but not saying definitive that's a strength, but there's certainly, I think that's something that I've dialed in over the years.
Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running a business, you don't always have the time to do your own books and forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function so that you have the time and resources back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funds, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. In some ways, I think it's a little bit easier to assess that in someone else than sometimes it is for yourself, especially when you're used to operating at such a high level for such a long time in sport and then having to transition out. I'm sure that that's something that a lot of athletes have to go through, of just having the vast majority of their life so dedicated and focused towards operating in one particular way, and then your career ends and then you've got to figure out what happens from there. You mentioned a little bit of the journey that you went on, but on a more personal level, what was that experience like of almost like knowing what you're doing day in, day out on the rugby field versus then having to figure out what comes next?
I think that's the biggest challenge for any athlete. It's a professional athlete and then goes into something else. So we always say transitioning to the real world, because there's a few things that are probably a given. So firstly, as an athlete, categorically, you're going to be a subject matter expert in whatever field you're in. And you've created normally a whole support system around you, or it's been provided to you. And I go back to it. I mentioned a few of my rugby mentors, but literally in a team environment at an elite sporting level, you have coaches, you have dietitians, you have strength and conditioning coaches, high performance directors, you have medical staff, you have every single thing that you could ever wish for, someone who's overseeing that to make sure that you can be your best self in that vertical. And then the coaches, their job is to get you to be better. So you've got all these people that vested interest in you growing and developing. Then as soon as you go into a corporate environment, it's almost, don't get me wrong, there's people who will take an ownership or might sponsor you. Often that's a nice corporate word, or take an active role and mentor you. But their job isn't to make you better. They're doing it because they think they can see, they want to, out of a desire to want to benefit you. It's a very, very different paradigm. So that's one. And then secondly, I don't think it's very rare for an athlete to become a subject matter expert in their next endeavor immediately. I think that there's a determination, a desire, and a will to roll up your sleeves and do whatever needs to be done so that it can happen. But there's a lot of catching up to be done. And I guess for me, it's just simple math, right? 15 years of playing professional sport, probably plus 2, so that's 17 years behind someone my age, really. However, what you don't cater for and don't understand or can't comprehend or commercialize or put a value on is all the lessons that you learn almost by osmosis or innately by being in this high-performing environment for however long that is. And so it's a matter of there's that lag effect of you might not be a subject matter expert to a certain period of time, catching up from an intellectual property or understanding of what you're doing, the different modality or different sector you're in. But then eventually there becomes a point in time when you know that some of these high-performance methodologies that you've been exposed to, and to be blunt, mediocrity isn't part of an elite sports person's DNA. So it's everything catches up quite quickly if you apply yourself. Yeah. But there is that uncertainty. So it's uncomfortable. And the reality is, as an athlete, desire to get better and evolve and constantly improve is there. It's what you do. Like literally, you cannot have longevity as an athlete without that as being one of your number one focus points or pillars of what you do. But it's how do you extrapolate that to something where you you might never be someone that's deemed to be an expert or know the right way forward. That's a real challenge. And so then you don't know. And when you don't know, you got to lean on your mates, lean on mentors, lean on sponsors, or whatever that word is. And you got to find a way to map that out. And that's the hardest part, I think, for a lot of the athletes.
Yeah. I feel like that's a very similar transition to a lot of people who, I guess, want to start a company or have exited out of one company and is trying to figure out what to do next. And it can be a bit of a difficult process. And again, in hindsight, everything seems a little bit obvious. And what you're doing with XV Capital seems like it fits such an important need. Your background and experience seems like such a great fit for that. But I imagine there's a bit of a process in getting to that as well. What was the catalyst or bit of insight that's led to what XV Capital is now?
I think it was more the market need, to be honest. I think certainly this is globally, but in Australia as well, there's a lot of sports technology startups. I think there's in between 700 and 800 sports technology businesses in this country. But as far as how many businesses have revenue north of 10 million, it would be, not many. I'd say maybe 10% if we're lucky. That's 70. I think it's less than that. So what we've seen is a lot of interesting technologies that's starting to have revenue profile and growing, but need help to go to the next level, i.e. get that revenue profile up to 10 million recurring revenue or whatever you want to call that. And so that combined with the fact that I think historically sport in general, Australians, we punch above our weight. So there's been areas of digital transformation and or technology where we've done quite well. Catapult is a global leader of GPS tracking, has been for a long time. You got Valve doing amazing things as well. However, throughout the whole entire, I guess we'll call it ecosystem, don't like using that word too often, but throughout the whole entire sporting landscape, utilization of digital transformation and innovation, data and insights across everything that's done in sport, we're a laggard. Sport is a laggard globally, and we're in, I guess, it's a big question mark whether Australia, we're actually behind, certainly North America, from a commercialization of sport and business of sport and fan engagement. They're amazing over there. We can get that, but we're in danger of, we need to catch up. And so from our perspective, that's been working in the sector for about 5 years, and we feel like XV, we want to try to play a really active role on fast tracking that digital transformation in sport in this region. And the reason why, you don't have to look further than in your own household. I spoke about my childhood, growing up playing sport the whole entire time, whereas kids nowadays, or I was out in the park the whole time, right? Kids nowadays are nowhere near will be just going up to the park by themselves or with their mates every day. Their outdoor activities, you've got devices and everything else. There's so many other things that kids can do with their time, and they do. And organised sport has diminished. So it's, how does sport remain relevant? Well, digitising and digital transformation and this space where we're at is an enabler to do that. And so it's just been through natural evolution that we've played in. We're seeing a significant need. And I guess from a high level, what XV is trying to do, we're working an intersection of sports, technology and investment. And ideally, if we do our job really, really well, if investors want to get access to a sector that's predominantly been non-correlated to most other sectors and that has lots of tailwinds being digital transformation and technology in sport, hopefully we can be a meaningful avenue to doing that. And if we've done that, ideally the sports have thrived through digital transformation, and the technologies have hopefully done well too.
Yeah. I think sports as an asset class has become so interesting in the last couple of years, both from a technology perspective, obviously what's happening with a lot of celebrity ownership into sports teams, like what Ryan Reynolds is doing with Wrexham as an example, and just even just the valuation of a lot of these sporting teams as well is going through the roof. I think one of the things that's often overlooked is I think sports is actually really complex industry as well. It's not like sports is a big bucket, involves a lot of different kind of elements of that. I guess from XV's perspective, what are you finding as where the opportunities are at the moment, or what are kind of areas that are really interesting to you at the moment?
Well, I'd say that firstly, how we look at sport and sports investment, and at the moment we're predominantly sports tech. We're trying to look for sports technologies that are transformative, that are solving big problems in sport. And ideally, they've got a leverage revenue model that's scalable across multiple sports regions and ideally even sectors. Because we know that sport's incredibly niche, but often the adjacent sector can dwarf the actual sports sector, i.e. health and well-being. We're aging population, if we're looking at neurocognitive health and everything around that, and concussions are part of that as well. There's interesting side adjacent markets or sectors where it is significant. And I guess another example of that would be in human potential high performance. All of my mates still find this amazing. Every single training session of my elite professional life, in every single game, I did a recovery session, i.e. ice spins. And often, probably, I don't know, three or four heat and ice therapies every week. Sleep. I remember we did a sleep survey. Probably we had it at a wearable. I think it was around about 2001. Wow. Yeah, that was actually through the AIS. So the time frame for stuff like that was normal for us to understand if you're a good sleeper or not. What are your habits prior to sleep and all these things that are critical. It was amazing. We had over a third of our team who were bad sleepers. And some of those guys were trying to sleep with the TV on. I mean, I remember just saying, mate, are you serious? But this is what happens in a high-performing elite environment whereby you're trying to do incremental improvements for 1%. Something like that could be 10%. But going back to it, so they're just two examples of recovery, which now recovery, sleep, all of these things are huge. Longevity is a big thematic for people in health and well-being. But the genesis of a lot of these technologies and the improvements have been in sport predominantly. So that's just some really simple examples of things that we look at and how we look at it. And then in particular, the more scalable it goes from the high performance or the elite version of the game all the way down to the every warrior community participant. Obviously, the more it can do that technology, the bigger addressable market, and the more we look at that as being a great thing. So, I mean, another example of a company that we really like at the moment, it's doing amazing things, is Prevent Biometrics. They're a instrumented mouthguard based out of US. They're the ones that only just last week, their next iteration of product is a red flashing light on the mouthguard when the person has a big impact. And for the Women's World Cup that's happening right now, they're going to be using that technology. So literally via Bluetooth, someone on the sideline will see that ping anyway, but every single person on the pitch will see that someone's got a red mouth, and that ain't blood, it's from the mouthguard. So that person needs to come up for a head injury assessment. We see a time and a place literally in the next 2 to 3 years where every single kid that's playing contact sport more than likely will have one of those smart mouthguards, so that preventing the chance of second impact syndrome and or repeated trauma, which those two things from experience are really significant things when it comes to concussion and issues around head impact. So that's another one. And it's really interesting because that company already has a US Department of Defense contract. We didn't realize this, but over 35% of armed forces personnel suffer concussion in training or in deployment. 35%? Correct.
Wow.
So it's an example of something that's solving huge problems and looking like being a fantastic initiative as far as this whole concussion paradigm, which I mentioned before, brain health and ocular motor tracking, different goggles and different things. There's lots of things out there. Blood and biomarkers are out there. All these things are happening, and eventually there'll be a point in time where technology innovation will help make our sports safer, which I think is great. But this one in particular, potentially, we don't know, but potentially the same technology utilised in armed forces, military personnel might even have a big application. Maybe.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about something really important and meaningful, and probably something that a lot of you listening can relate to. For the last few years, I've had a front row seat into how challenging and difficult it can be to build something meaningful. The late nights, the constant pressure, the feeling that no matter how well you're doing, there's always more to do, and that whatever you're doing is never enough. For a long time, I thought that was just a trade-off. To be successful in business, everything else, your health, your fitness, your relationships, had to take a back seat. But what if that wasn't true? As an investor, I know that the most successful and impactful businesses are built over decades, not over months. But so often we approach life and our businesses as if we're running a 100-meter sprint rather than the marathon that we're truly running. These are the questions and insights that led me to launching the Komo Club, the world's first human accelerator. Early this year, we brought together 26 incredible people, from founders, investors, professional athletes to senior executives at some of the largest companies. It's an 8-week program designed for high performers to implement systems for long-term success in their business and all areas of their life, from fitness to mental health, relationships, and leadership, all within a trusted and high-caliber community that just gets it. So if you've been doing well but know there's another level, or if you've been running hard and want to recalibrate, I'd love for you to check it out. Cohort 2 kicks off in August and applications are now open. You can find out more details or apply at the Komo Club. That's TheKomoclub.com. All right, let's get back to this episode.
No, that's super fascinating. I think, first of all, I'm extremely grateful to have you as one of our speakers for Cohort 2 of the Komo Club, where the idea is that we want to take the same systems and principles that we use to scale startups and businesses and apply that on an individual level. But part of that is a lot of the philosophies and structures, like you mentioned in some of the work that you were doing in the early 2000s in measuring sleep, measuring a lot of these, collecting data around all of these things to get insight on that. For any founders that are listening to this, what are the core tenets of things that you focus on from a high performance perspective in sport that you think founders should be thinking about for their own high performance? So sleep as an example. Are there any other areas or variables that you think people should be focusing on outside of that?
Well, this is the thing. It's how far do you want to go down the rabbit hole? So, which thankfully I did as an athlete and dabble every now and then now. I've been off alcohol the last month and I won't be having alcohol until I go on my holiday with my wife in September. But that's another example, right? Everyone knows that is not performance enhancing and people can get in really bad cycles in and around alcohol. Caffeine's an interesting one. Caffeine is actually performance enhancing, but also has a half-life of around about, I think it's 10 hours. So caffeine post 2:30 p.m. is probably a no-no. That was as clear as it was articulated to us when we were elite athletes. And so, but it is performance enhancing. There was a period of time actually when I was playing where caffeine was banned, i.e. a high level of caffeine. If you were tested and you had it, you actually broke a positive test. What else is there? So we said recovery, we said sleep. Yeah, sleep's a really, really, really important one. Ice bins and saunas, really, really important. There's been conflicting data and evidence around these though as well, and I haven't really had a good look lately at what's up to date and the most definitive research, other than from my personal utilization of both. I think they're both fantastic. Both sauna. It's as much, even if it's a placebo effect, I think it's significant.
It's still helpful.
But certainly, from my understanding, saunas are excellent for your broader health and well-being and detoxification side of things with your body as well, those processes. Ice therapy, from my perspective, was outstanding. I loved it. So there's those ones. And then obviously diet. What you put in your system is so important, or what you don't. So right now, I've been dabbling in a little bit of intermittent fasting and whatnot. So previously I went off gluten for 2 years. All these different things. These are all interesting, different things that are really important. Yeah.
And are these things that you experiment on yourself with, or do you collect insight into things to figure out what works? Like what's your approach to it?
No, a bit of both. I'm happy to be a bit of a lab rat on some of these things. Yeah, I don't know. I've always just been that way inclined. So I guess another example of that was when research first came out about recovery compression garments. Would have been again around early 2000s. The data research was irrefutable that just wearing compression garments was significantly a number of standard deviations, I think, from recollection on impact as far as recovery. So massage therapy, ice therapy, and other recovery methods, even just wearing compression garments, I think almost was better than it. Or it had significant improvements. So from that moment onwards, I just wore compression garments the whole time. Yeah. So I guess I've always been one that if there's data out there, proof that this is going to better us, I'm more than happy to have a try. And if I like it, I'll do it. Yeah. So I don't know, that's just always been my methodology. And in particular, probably as an athlete, I went back to placebo effect, right? So I used to have my own, typically one external massage every week. I used to have chiro, acupuncture, own physio sessions. There's a whole broader team around people around allied health that I knew what I needed to do to be world-class preparation. Different stretch sessions, Pilates sessions, everything. That's on top of what I guess the organisation provided for me. And
just out of curiosity, what does that look like for you now? So now, I guess it's like you said, it's one thing when you've got all of that support system and things like that around you to do that. I imagine you have a pretty hectic schedule now with everything you're doing with XV, and it's tough to find time to do a lot of the things that you probably want to do. Are there like particular pillars that you go, these are like the 2, 3, 4 things that I absolutely need to get done?
Yeah, that's for me. It's the biggest challenge because body wise, I can't train as hard or as simply as I used to. I actually believe it or not, I used to like running a lot. I can't run, and then so I've got a mountain bike. I will ride that every now and then, but even riding that might be flare up my knee every now and then or whatever. So I've just got to. For me, it's actually what goes in is really, really critical. I've got to be careful about what I eat and what I put into my body. The better I'm out of that, the less chance I've got of getting out of kilter. But so I think probably I was going to say second week, but not that consistently. But I do still get a massage every now and then. I think that was the number one thing for me that would help me to just deplug. So for me, a deep tissue, I used to have one every week. It was the only time where I'd actually fall asleep in the middle of the day because I'd get them to be so hard that the only way I just had to switch off my muscles to release my muscles, and then eventually my whole body would just shut down for 10, 15 minutes. So I still do that. So that's one that I acutely know that it's really good for me. Golf was always a good one when I had time, or when I was injury free. That again, 5 hours or even just 9 holes, 2 hours of no phone, deplugging, getting away from everything is phenomenal. And all walking outdoors, that whole earthing concept. I don't take off my shoes, but I have. But those things they're really important for me. If I was a bit younger, I'm 48 now. If my body wasn't as broken, I probably would be easier to train a bit more. But only recently, 2 weeks ago, I've joined a gym, and I'm trying to get to the gym probably 3 or 4 times a week. There you go.
Yeah. I was just saying I just signed up to BFT last week and been going every day.
It's hard.
Definitely feeling it.
I think the one thing that's different, right, is you have to structure it into your schedule. Like you've actually got to put it in. And sometimes for people in the real world, as we call it, people at work day in, day out, maybe sometimes the easiest is to do it first thing in the morning, 5:30, 6:30, whatever time you get up, do it, then it's done. Or structure it in. That's the only way. I find it if you don't do that, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I was speaking to someone who's a Hyrox ambassador in Singapore, and one of the things that she mentioned, which I actually loved that perspective on, was I think a lot of us try and squeeze in a lot of those things around everything else we have going on during the day. But for her, it was, this is the priority. So I structured that in and everything else kind of goes in around that. And it's a small shift, small tweak, but just that kind of mindset shift really realigns that kind of focus on the consistency with a lot of these things that you need.
And I also think that in a what way, if you are paying for a membership to something, then that to me then signals that it is important. And then hopefully that then translates to a priority on your scheduling. Yeah. So sometimes getting a free membership or whatever it is, or that potentially might not be enough commitment. So to me, there's a lot of always historically committing is a big part of the process of then getting, sacrifice and commit. Yeah,
absolutely. You've got to feel the pain one way or another.
Correct.
Speaking of which, again, if I read this correctly, you had 15 operations during your career.
Yeah.
That's mental. So I wanted to play cricket professionally, Indian kid growing up. I had a really bad knee injury that kind of put me out for a very long time. That kind of ended things. That was one big injury. How do you keep coming back from that many operations, many of which I assume were quite significant as well.
Yeah. So I tend to say normally when I'm talking about this, resilience and all these things, that 4 of my injuries were career-ending or career-threatening. 3 of them were full shoulder reconstructions, and 1 was my back surgery, which was probably the most debilitating of all. And a lot of the other ones were broken bones that need to be repaired, I should say, and or scopes, i.e. something wasn't quite right with a knee or a shoulder and needed to be fixed immediately. And so to me, it was weird, right? So I played for 15 seasons, but once I got into the Australian team in 2000, so that was my 3rd season, full season playing professionally, until when I moved down here to the Rebels. If I was fit, I was playing for Australia. I just had 2 years and other times where I was not fit. So once I was in that team in 2000, it was an amazing year. We went in, I think I mentioned that kick in Durban and different things. Ilsey did that kick over in Wellington and we win the match. It was just an amazing year to be part of that team. And from then on, I just wanted to not stop playing in that environment. It was just amazing, right? Unfortunately, the next year was the British and Irish Lions in 2001, and I injured my shoulder. I dislocated my shoulder in the semi-final of the Super Rugby, and I had to have a full shoulder reconstruction. So my whole year, so everything I was thinking about that whole year was to play against the British and Irish Lions, often once in a lifetime opportunity, and that was taken. So part of me, even that time, that was my first real big setback, was this is out of my control. You really get good at what you can control. You can control the controllables, right? And you get really good at optimizing your preparation. And they're almost the same, right? You can't let things weigh on you, and especially for your mental and emotional energy on things that are out of your control. And that was done. I couldn't do it. There's nothing I could do about it. Sorry. And so what I found, and the easiest way to describe this is, in those scenarios, there's 2 ways you can go with this. You can either feed the good wolf or feed the bad wolf. So the good wolf, as the American Indian folklore says, it feeds on, the evil wolf feeds on all negative sentiments and bad things, jealousy, envy, all negative attributes, and the good wolf feeds on all positive attributes. And for me, it took me a while to actually saw this illustrated. And I was like, mate, this is what I've been doing. So anytime I faced one of these scenarios, it'd be surround myself with the best team, the best surgeon, the best physio, the best rehab program. And how am I going to feed the good wolf in this scenario? So firstly, I'd immediately go to a whoop sense of reality. If this is the end of my career, am I happy? I'm not really happy because I want to do more, but you know what? I've played for my country. I've done amazing things. That's great. I'm privileged. Secondly, I don't want that to happen, but how do I come back bigger and better than I was before? And again, go back to the goals, but having a map as to how we do that. In particular, one thing that is the silver lining in feeding the good wolf on an exponential level, when you're an elite athlete, often you're traveling the whole entire time. You don't see your family and friends as much. When I was injured, I was at home the whole entire time. So with my family and friends all the time. And your support network, which is powerful if you get it right. And so for me, that's how I managed every injury. So often I was all or nothing. So literally I would get injured, and then I'd go, right, bang, I'm at home. I've got my physio. Mal Brown was my physio. He actually reached out to me the other day, had a good chat, and he sent me a few photos of in his practice. I used to joke that one of these wings of his house should have been called the Mortlock wing because I was one of his favourite clients because I was always injured. But we would actually have fun working my absolute backside off to make sure that whatever we were rehabbing, whether it was my shoulders, my knees, my back or whatever, I would be stronger by the time I came back. And then the S&C coaches, so strength and conditioning trainers, would put a program in place that maybe I couldn't do upper body for a period of time or whatever I couldn't do, but we could do certain training sprint training, yada, 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 and making sure that when that time came, I was better. And that happened every time. So literally every time I came back from an injury, I came back better, bigger, faster, stronger. And 03 World Cup was the same. So I actually had a shoulder reconstruction in the year of the World Cup, and I thought I wasn't going to make the World Cup squad in 03. So we had to fast track my rehabilitation by, at the time, 6 months was roughly the window. I had to play 4 months and 3 weeks post-operation.
Actually get on the field and play.
Correct.
Wow.
And we did it. And we did it quite well. And that intercept that everyone asked me about against New Zealand, a lot of the reason I actually looked quite quick then was because I actually was quick, because I had spent 3 to 4 months post-op. As soon as I could start running, I started doing sprint training, which I couldn't do if I was playing. Yeah. So again, feeding the good wolf, even that little moment, there was some good wolf there.
Yeah. I love that. Sterlo, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your experience and insights. For anyone that wants to find out more about you, XB Capital, get in touch. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I think you actually go to our website. We've got forms anyone can fill out. We'll get in contact with them straight away.
Perfect. I will make sure I add those links in the show notes. Once again, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to episode 219 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this episode will be available at startupplaybook.co. If you enjoyed this episode and liked hearing the lessons from Stirling on high performance and want to hear more from him as well as other successful entrepreneurs on how to implement systems to help you win in both business and in life, consider applying to the Komo Club. Applications for Cohort 2 are now open, and you can find out more details and apply via our website, which is thekomoclub.com. That's thekomoclub.com. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.